Before watching LeSserafim's Make It Look Easy documentary, I'd already seen people failing to sympathize with it. And naturally, I assumed it was because at some point, people tend to stop seeing public figures as people with real emotion. And considering that the group was currently going through a hate train, over-the-top criticism just comes with the territory. Not to say my assumptions were unfounded, as the public can be quite harsh with criticism, often crossing boundaries to try and make a point. But after watching the documentary for myself, I can honestly say Source Music should have seen this coming. A poorly arranged pity documentary focused on how much the girls are struggling in an industry where struggle is a basic ingredient for success, as a response to a hate train whose foundation was rightfully questioning the group's skills, is marketing Armageddon. At this point in time, we should all be aware that some K-pop hate trains have logical basis of criticism, before the public herd takes over and genuinely buries the reproval under their hateful comments, which in this case applies to LeSserafim. The girls took what was considered to be a huge K-pop representation platform and gave a less than ideal vocal performance, which fans viewed as an embarrassment. Rightfully so, bringing all the criticism back to the surface. Now, while I personally believe it would not have reached these levels had Min Hee-jin not used them as human shields to cover up her crime, I also believe that Source Music could have applied wise marketing tactics to avoid worsening the problem and to protect the girls from all the hate. The smartest thing to do would have been to address the focal point of the criticism, which in this case was their vocal skills, in a way that would not only put critics in their place and reassure their fans, but position haters to be seen for what they are. Just hateful people. Instead, they chose the route of throwing a pity party for the girls, mainly for one member in the group who definitely did not deserve one. To say this documentary painted Sakura in the poorest light would be an understatement. Being the most criticized member when it comes to skills and seeing the disapproval she faced over the manner she chose to address it on Weverse right after weekend 1 of Coachella, trying to get the public to view her as the victim in this case was a rookie mistake. The amount of whining and crying projected from Sakura alone in this documentary, whose purpose was to showcase the authentic process of taking a difficult and tedious task and making it, quote, look easy to the rest of the world, was both irritating and exhausting, killing the very plot of the documentary itself. Couple that with the numerous times she was praised for, quote, doing her best, and even watching a vocal teacher telling her that she is giving 120%, while the effort being referred to was clearly not in the room with us, it made her appear to be some pampered, spoiled princess who is allergic to something as common as criticism. Raw or authentic emotions are always the easiest way to gain public sympathy, as to some degree the public can relate. Nothing like a little emotional blackmail to get the public off your artist's back. But overusing the same tactics will only piss them off. When Jennifer Lawrence fell by the stairs on her way to accept her Oscar win in 2013, the public loved it. They laughed it off and labeled it as funny, which only added to her relatability and authenticity persona despite being a celebrity. It wasn't until she fell again the next year at the same event that the public turned sour and dragged her for, quote, doing too much to come off as relatable. And suddenly things that didn't matter before, like her being a millionaire or living in a mansion and having a public presence, were being brought up to prove that she indeed wasn't relatable to us. Past clips of her oversharing certain parts of her life, once praised for being, quote, real, were now being scrutinized as classless publicity stunts to gain attention and fan praise. Overplaying one marketing gimmick or emotion in an effort to shape public opinion will only land you in hotter waters. And this is easily the biggest problem when it comes to how Source Music tackled Sakura's criticism. In LeSserafim's 2022 documentary, Sakura is seen crying about her struggles with singing and her feelings getting hurt over the criticism that came with it. Fast forward 2 years, 2 comebacks, and 1 tour later, and we have yet another documentary of her crying about the same thing. And worse, half an entire episode dedicated to it. Save for the ridiculously silly montage of her practicing her vocals a few times and giggling with her coaches, the documentary does not showcase real moments of struggle with effort being put in to better her craft. Even less impressive, we do not see Sakura receive any real and brutal constructive criticism that pinpoints exactly what her problem is and how to deal with it. Compare it with ILE's debut preparation documentary, the second episode where Iroha struggles to record a part in Midnight Fiction. She's asked to repeat it so many times that the pressure gets to her, which eventually makes her crumble and start crying.
왜 울어야? 왜?
After a little reassurance, she is then given instructions on what to fix and points on where she is failing in order to improve for the next recording sitting. We then get clips of her practicing in the vocal practice room and sometimes at home for days, and we're talking 4 to 5 hours at a time, by the way, until she gets her parts right. In some clips, she even explains what exactly she is trying to fix and the notes she took down to help her get there. To even sweeten the scenario, we get input from Yuna, the group's leader, on her perspective in terms of Iroha's struggles and how hard she is on herself in general, which helps us sympathize sympathize with her struggle. In later episodes, we also witness Iroha being tough on herself during a performance evaluation days before their debut, to the point where she hyperventilates, basically backing up everything Yuna said about her. On the scheduled recording day, after practicing, she actually gets the bridge which she was failing to get multiple times right in one go, and she executes all of her parts so well that she earns praise from the producers, who, by the way, continue to compliment her even after she's left the room. This format of showcasing Eilid's struggles, the process of hard work to become better, and the improvement that comes with the result of that hard work was a smart way that helped Eilid gain sympathy from the public. When doing PR, one of the most basic things to understand is your audience, more specifically what they want in the face of criticism. In some cases, emotional blackmail and vulnerability does the job, while in others, silence or improvement are the only thing that will pacify them. In other issues, you have to double down and give them the middle finger. It's just a matter of knowing which criticism deserves what response. And by the way, I need to stress how important this is, because too many people defending Sakura keep trying to convince the public how victimizing the lack of empathy is for her. But you need to hear this. It is absolutely irrelevant whether you are justified or not. The public does not care about the truth, just the appearance of it. If something looks true, they're simply going to believe it, even if beneath the surface it isn't. When Jimin called Mina's accusations against her fiction, the public dogpiled on Jimin, accusing her of gaslighting Mina, even though Jimin was right. Mina's accusations were exaggerated, but because Mina seemed like the victim at that time, nothing Jimin said was going to change the public's mind. It took silence from her for over a year until Mina shot herself in the foot for the public to realize that she was the real victim all along. Believe me, even I put together a 40-minute video with proof that Mina was lying, and people harassed me for it, not Mina for using them. This is why it is necessary to understand that if the basis of your hate train is either false allegations or skill criticism, trying to play the victim will only get you despised. The best thing to do is to go into private and perfect what is being criticized in order for the public to get off your back, or at least majority of them. Take 2022 for example, an interesting year for hating on female idols. Next to Garam and Wanyang, Yiso was easily the most hated girl of that year. There were three main sources of her hate train. 1. Unchaste stands, which will be reserved for a later video in this series. 2. Her lip-syncing performance while sitting down to IU's Strawberry Moon along with Wanyang. And 3. This incident. Now, while she couldn't do much about the first issue, how she responded to the other two was completely in her control and would shape how K-pop stans view her from 2023 up until now. I Am era IVE's very first comeback since the harsh criticism on her lip syncing. Not only did Yiso sing loud enough to hear over the backtrack for every performance, she was also tasked with singing Ray's lines, who was on hiatus during the entire promotional era, and she delivered those lines flawlessly. For both the pre-release Kitsch and the title track I Am, Yiso was singing clearly for everyone to hear, and it was obvious from the encore stages that she had been practicing her singing. For the award show incident, however, she did this.
다이브, 오늘 상 줘서 너무 고마워요.
Instead of taking the criticism to heart and trying to appear more mature for the audience, Yiso doubled down and repeated the very action that got her dragged in the first place. But this time, instead of the public getting angry with her, she was praised. I mean, she went from being called a princess to being crowned the first real graduate of the school of Wanyangism. Translation? The public was in love with how she handled that part of her hate train. Despite improving and changing in one area and doubling down in another, Yiso received praise for both. Why is that? That's because every response is a statement. By improving, she sends a message that she's willing to take criticism when it comes to her job, and that she takes it seriously enough to give her audience a satisfactory experience. Doubling down on her award speech sends a different message, that her personality is not up for discussion with people who do not know her personally, and that the public is either going to have to stan her as she is or piss off. More importantly, it made it look like she was mocking those who were hating on her, which was just hilarious on its own. PR at its peak. On one hand, she will take criticism to do her job right, but on the other, she will not be bullied into changing her personality. When her skills got criticized, we didn't see her complain and cry about it for 2 consecutive years. What we saw was improvement in a short period of time, which is what people wanted to see from Sakura. How the public viewed her weverse response after the reaction to Coachella should have been a warning sign that this path would only get her dragged even further. In fact, what Source Music should have realized was that this specific response is where most fans' sympathy ran dry. Comparing her to her IZ*ONE peers, Wanyang and Yujin, who had to take the same criticism a year earlier and responded by yielding results and showing noticeable improvement, her message made her appear arrogant, stubborn, and unable to showcase professionalism in the face of criticism. I can't tell you the number of times of people who said, as soon as I saw that weverse post, I stopped defending her. These two girls debuted with her 6 years ago, and instead of making excuses, they improved on their vocal skills. Meanwhile, the best Sakura could provide was, I'm just a girl. Making excuses for not being able to do your job is going to get you criticized, and Sakura has spent over half a decade earning that criticism. Her response guaranteed the fans' resentment coming her way, in comparison to Wonyoung and Yujin, who avoided it by simply doing better. It is not wrong for people to expect professionalism from an idol, and crying repeatedly about criticism shows a lack of it. Fans not feeling sorry for her is not a lack of empathy, but rather it is the emotional intelligence to recognize that right now, she doesn't deserve any. The everyday person Sakura's age would get fired from their job for not only failing to fulfill their job description, but for crying and getting defensive when given constructive criticism. So asking for those people to somehow have empathy for an adult who chooses not to get better at her job, but somehow still manages to make millions of dollars with her group every year, just seems unfair from their perspective, and rightfully so. The number of times people have criticized her vocals, diagnosed what is wrong with them, and provided specifics on what needs improvement are numerous. People cannot be blamed if Sakura chooses to ignore them and spends her energy on the chronically online mob whose only job is to hate. Facing a hate train or online hate in general is not an excuse to slack off responsibilities. I've went through the exact same problem in the last couple of years. I mean, the amount of hate this group got for just breathing was enormous. But they still listened to the criticism and improved their vocals and live singing. So what exempts Sakura from doing the same? It is also not helpful that her fans are trying to shield her from that criticism. And before you say, no, we're not shielding her from criticism, we're defending her from hate, I know the difference between the two. I know when people are trying to defend Sakura from the hate she's getting and people trying to make excuses for her inability to do her job. Oh, she's just tired. Oh, she's just anxious. Maybe she actually needs surgery for her vocals because she has a vocal problem, which, by the way, I'm not sure that has ever been publicly discussed by Sakura or her company. Those are not defenses from hate. They are excuses. And trying to guilt trip those who are calling her out into silence because she receives hate from the lens of her critics, their reactions are totally justified. Their breaking point wasn't just that one moment of her crying in the documentary that everyone keeps bringing up. That's where her defenders are missing it. It is everything that led them to watching that moment. Her consistent complaining, her lack of accountability, her crying about the same situation 2 years ago and not trying to do better, her arrogant justification for the Coachella performance, and the lack of improvement in over half a decade all rolled into one. People are simply tired of feeling bad for her and now just want to see results. The documentary itself leaned heavily on her personal struggles, victimizing her and magnifying her issues above the rest of the group. To an audience that already knows what her problem is, the solution required to solve it, and views Sakura herself as the missing ingredient between her bad vocals and improvement, it's ridiculous. Using one giant brushstroke to paint everyone as insensitive or accusing them of lacking empathy for her suffering seems like such an easy and convenient excuse to excuse her lack of professionalism and a way to dodge actual constructive criticism that she's been getting for years. More importantly, her avoidance of it. It is not our responsibility to tone down our criticism because of the hate. It is her responsibility to put the hate aside and to see the constructive criticism and improve in accordance. But as for the actual hate she's receiving, I think we need to address an important point that so many covering this topic are neglecting to assess. Imagine in a time of war, a soldier on your team hands over his gun to the enemy to shoot him. You would think they were pretty stupid, right? Well, that's pretty much the same thing that Source Music and Sakura are doing. It should be common knowledge by now that when you're facing a hate train or public image scrutiny, the last thing one should do is to give their enemy ammunition to use against them. Plenty of sympathizers keep bringing up how awful it is that Sakura is being ridiculed for having a moment of weakness like any other human being, which is valid, don't get me wrong. But what they're failing to notice is that this comes after years of showing no improvement. For a long time now, Source Music and Sakura have been feeding haters with enough ammo to shoot at Sakura to begin with. I understand that the weverse response was after the filming of this documentary, but that should have been their sign to edit and downplay the pity party they had going on for her. I mean, they didn't struggle too hard to eliminate Garan from their first documentary, so this should have been a breeze. Why they didn't do it, I will never understand. If the public felt Sakura was being arrogant by defending their Coachella performance, it should have been obvious to their company that the documentary would only make it worse. While yes, haters have this innate ability to turn anything into some form of hate. I mean, Jenny was literally harassed for picking up a blanket. It is because of this reason that companies cannot afford to neglect loose ends such as these. Part of PR is predicting how the public will respond to certain situations and making sure those situations are corrected in case they become a problem. For the documentary especially, clips of Sakura being vulnerable during her practices and her breakdowns should not have been publicized. While being vulnerable in my eyes is viewed as strength and authenticity, some emotional breakdowns and moments of weakness are not for public consumption by the privacy of your home or the company of your friends and family in order to protect your psyche. Part of the reason why we have privacy is to avoid giving trolls and haters unnecessary reasons to use our moments of weakness as weapons for their stupid games. Emotions such as anger, fear, and anxiety are absolutely normal, but we have to recognize how easy they are to manipulate, and haters can use them to feed any negative agenda, which is why companies need to take caution when deciding to not only document, but publicize these moments. They say you can't keep a bird from flying over your head, but you can keep it from landing and building a nest. And Sakura's hair has been woven into these hateful nests thanks to her and Source Music's lack of tact and strategy. There's a fine line between looking vulnerable and looking like a crybaby. Constantly broadcasting Sakura crying every time the conversation of her vocals comes up, or having too many of these so-called vulnerable moments where she cries and breaks down, or worse, when she's having confessionals constantly victimizing herself, it does not make her look like a victim to bullies, especially when we're talking about a situation that has already been addressed 2 years ago. Rather, moments like that make her look insecure and weak. And we all know bullies only prey on those they perceive as weak and fragile. Making excuses for her shortcomings and constantly referring to herself as someone who is suffering made bullies believe that they have the power to toy with her emotions. And instead of feeling sorry for her, they simply did it again. The bullying mentality in K-pop is fed by misery, victim mentalities, and vulnerabilities. K-pop bullies do what they do for fun. It is all a game to them. Making think pieces lecturing them on how hate is immature and how badly it affects the idol is useless. Believe me, I did it for 3 years. They know how much this affects the idol. In fact, here's a tough pill to swallow. That is exactly why they do it to begin with. Because they know that they can toy with their minds and their emotions. They like having that power. But if you show them that they cannot control you or bully you into submission, they eventually either get bored or get scared and they back off. Source Music and Sakura should have been careful on how much of her vulnerable moments were being shown in this documentary, because as delusional as we would all like to be, as a public figure, she does not have the luxury of showing her weaknesses whenever she feels like it. And while she knows not to do that on stage, she also needs to recognize that she cannot do that when the public doesn't see her as a victim either, whether in a documentary or in any place else. At a time when the group is dealing with a hate train and criticism, maximizing her struggles and weaknesses in a documentary is public image suicide. What the documentary should have done was zoom the focus on her putting in effort to change, more than just a couple of clips of her writing notes. I mean, practicing on her own for hours, late into the night, getting brutal and honest criticism on her singing, being assessed performance-wise, and other members chipping in to help her. And more importantly, getting their view on how hard Sakura works to improve her craft. Her confessionals on this issue should have been more focused on what she was working on and how much time she was taking out of her schedule to practice and how the criticism helped her improve her skills. Not only would that make her look resilient and professional, it would show that her job means something to her and that she cares enough to listen to fans' concerns. The documentary should have also not spent so much time on her issue. Like 8 minutes on one episode would have been more than enough, so as to not exhaust the watchers about this problem that they already heard about in their previous documentary. Now, does this guarantee that all haters would just say nothing and leave her alone? No. But it does guarantee that their harassment would be far less than it is at the moment due to the lack of material to use against her. It makes the haters irrelevant because at the end of the day, the criticism is what matters to her, not what they are saying. Haters are feeding off her lack of confidence, and presenting it for internet consumption is tactless, which, by the way, is only half of what I think her real problem is. From both the documentary and her weverse response, it seems like her anxiety is more rooted in her inability to face reality than the lack of confidence in her skills. In ep1, it was so obvious how quick she was capable of improving, especially in areas of dance and stage presence. But singing has proven to be a challenge because, truthfully, Sakura's never really had to improve skill-wise to get ahead of any competition, or to get to where she is right now. Looking back at the AKB 48 days all the way to Produce 48, due to Sakura's I'm just a girl persona along with the unfortunate unfortunate circumstances that would befall some of her fellow contestants, she was able to get ahead of her competition to join a Japanese nationwide phenomenon, which helped her to further fame. More importantly, for Produce 48, survival shows were never really about talent. It's more about charming the audience, which is something she was very good at. When she was placed in the A tier for her first performance, not because her performance was anything special compared to the rest of the Japanese contestants. I mean, the Japanese contestants in general were graded poorly, but rather it was a way to make the Japanese audience feel like they mattered, like there was a reason for them to watch the show. She took advantage of that, as she should have, by the way, to cement herself into the minds and memories of voters. Sakura has had so many lives as an idol, more than most people realize, and during those times where she was raising in the ranks up until ICE1, charm and personality were the focal points for success and audience support. But times have changed now, and her audience has expanded too. She now has a more westernized audience with more than enough time to pick apart her skills, compare groups and members to each other, and have a lot of material to use, such as fan cams and stage performances. The Western audience loves to scrutinize talent and to criticize where they feel idols are lacking. She's also downsized, by the way, since HKT48 and ICE1, where she could get away with not being able to sing because those groups had several other members to pick up her vocal slack. But now, in a 5-member group, her flaws are on display for the world to see. Her reality has changed, and being charming is not enough anymore to keep the audiences happy, and she simply cannot deal with that. They need more, and she personally feels like she cannot deliver that. She's not used to her skills being targeted so blatantly in the way they have been in the last couple of years. Because of her past success, I think she pedestaled herself, thinking all she was at that time plus her reputation would be satisfactory for this next phase as an idol. But it isn't, and she's suffering the consequences of that. What Sakura needs to do is ground herself in reality and surround herself with brutally honest vocal coaches who have her vocal improvement as a goal and who will not cushion her with random compliments just because she cried. I understand that anxiety can be crippling from personal experience, but a job is still a job, and Sakura is very privileged to be in one that allows so many failures and mistakes and still give you a paycheck at the end of the day. She should show gratitude by making an actual effort and not throwing a pity party for herself because people are getting tired. And it's only a matter of time before the only one attending that party is herself.